both had promising new startups, and yet it took a long time to raise money. And you said, raising money is messy and nonlinear and involves way more psychology than Excel. And admitting that feels like you're admitting you're doing it wrong. Hi, welcome to Off the Record, Climate Edition. This is the podcast about what's hot in climate tech and everything playing out behind the scenes. Fabien Koutchekian is the CEO of Genomines, and Skander Garroum is a three-time founder who's raised $25 million. Both have gone through hell successfully raising money for brand new companies, and they want to help you avoid some of the pain. Genomines secured one of the largest climate tech funding rounds in Europe in 2025. It turns out fundraising is messy and involves way more psychology than Excel. Skander Garroum was here today to tell you everything they don't teach you during your MBA or in the Y Combinator Playbook. You're going to want to listen if you want to know how psychology comes into play and impacts fundraising, how to create the conditions that can lead to FOMO or fear of missing out for investors, and finally, the factors that are absolutely critical when raising money and those that don't actually matter so much. Let's dive right in. Hi, I'm Jordy Gold.
And I'm Skander Garroum.
So, Skander, recently you wrote an article about how solar power is just exploding across Africa. And this thing you wrote went totally viral. It was just wild, the amount of engagement you got. Now,
Insane, 200,000 views.
200, so we're up to 200,000 now. That's a lot of engagement around a solar power article in Africa. I wasn't expecting that. Now, you've written a whole new piece, not solar power in Africa. This one's different, but it's getting a lot of attention as well. And this one is about how to actually raise your next round. Now, this piece hasn't gone viral, but this time you're getting some really important people saying some really nice things about what you wrote. So, for example, Dawn Lippert, she's the founder and CEO of Elemental Impact. They are the founder of Earthshot Ventures. And Dawn came out and put up this long post about your article and basically said, this is an absolute must read for anyone trying to raise money for something that's difficult to raise. So raising money for a fund, a company, a nonprofit. And so this is really high praise and it's coming from people who really know what they're talking about.
Yeah, and I was very, very happy with it, of course. But I think the origin story is very straightforward. We always have these public sessions, public/invite only/people need to apply for them, sessions at Climate Drift, and we had one with a very cool founder, Fabien Koutchekian, and he founded Genomines. The whole session was about his recent fundraising story because he just raised one of the largest Series A's in Europe, 45 million. Took him 14 months to raise it. He raised it from 12 funds. And yeah, it was very successful because this was one of the largest climate rounds this year. And the story had, and his learnings especially, had a lot of overlap with the time that I spent raising money for my last companies. So I spent most of my time, living in Silicon Valley and doing data and what is now AI, but what was back then data infrastructure companies. And I wanted to take these lessons that I had, but also that Fabien had this year, and capture it. And that was the little origin story of that.
Can you tell us a little bit just about what Fabien's company is doing and maybe just a little bit about the work that you were doing with your company you were raising money for?
Yeah, so Fabien has the way cooler company. They're doing mining, but they are doing mining with plants or through plants, right? So they plant specific plants on nickel-rich soil, and then these plants grow for a few months, 4 to 6 months, and then they, in that time, the plants extract metal from the ground and concentrate it. They harvest all these plants and then they process them into nickel. So they do nickel mining with plants.
Gotcha. So they're doing nickel and you were doing stuff that was sort of the early days of what wound up becoming AI.
Well, one little part of a very small cog in a very big machine, right? So we did infrastructure, like data infrastructure. So imagine every time you type something into ChatGPT, messages are needing to be transmitted in real time to servers and AI applied and inference and all that nice stuff. And this is tech that we developed.
Okay, so then two things here. One, I had no idea you could mine anything with plants until I had heard Fabien speak about his company, and that's just completely wild. And number two, You and I have a lot of conversations. We've talked a lot over the last year or so, and somehow I didn't actually know you did stuff that was connected to AI early on. We've spent so much time talking about the other things you've been involved with and all the other great things you've been working on.
Yeah. Oh, my life is climate now, so climate tech, and AI is a very small part of that. Although like the data center conversation is something that we will for sure pick up again. But yeah, I spent essentially the last 10, 15 years in data and AI beforehand, and all my friends are now either at Meta or Google or OpenAI or have their own cool new AI companies. In case they didn't switch to climate, to be fair.
It always helps to have friends in good places just like that.
Having access to all the cool new models helps too.
That is very helpful. So coming back to Fabien and his group, they took, I think, about 14 months to raise. I think it took your company a while to raise as well when you were in the thick of things. I think it was a company called Airy. Your group, Fabien's group, both had promising new startups, exciting stuff you were working on. And yet, despite having a lot of promise, it took a long time to raise money. And you said basically it wasn't really because you made any big mistakes. It's just sort of how things played out. So I wanna read something to you that you actually wrote in the article. Raising money is messy and nonlinear and involves way more psychology than Excel. And admitting that feels like you're admitting you're doing it wrong. Now, I gotta say, had a lot of conversations with people raising money, creating startups, building out all kinds of tech. Haven't spent a lot of time talking about psychology. And I think you've broken it down here in terms of some of the things that people tell you what you'll be doing when you start a company versus in reality what you actually end up doing. Maybe you could tell us sort of that differentiation. What are those two different groups of things?
Yeah, so it's essentially building products and then selling products and or services. The core idea, that I think is very, very true in startup world, but it's so much harder in deep tech and climate tech and frontier tech and what have you. So like, the people's actually building cool things with hardware or plans in that case is the general advice of like, start selling as soon as you can. Like you can do that if you're doing like SaaS and consulting, and like nowadays you can vibe code a cool prototype in a few hours or a few days. But if you're actually doing mining with plants in this case, and you need 5 to 10 years to actually figure out the actual process behind it, it gets really hard. So you need to break it down. You need to start making up milestones and progress, and you need to define your own roadmap that might not be as simple as start coding a first prototype and then start selling it.
Yeah, those are two very, very different things. So as you got into things with Fabian, there were good things and there were not so good things. And at one point, I know you guys talked about what was his shittiest moment. So what exactly happened for him at that time, and how did they handle that?
I think the meta story here is like when you work hard and you think everything's going well and you're making finally the progress that you want to make, and then you don't, right? And then you get a curveball, something happens. For Fabien, it was like in the middle of his fundraising story. They had like a conflict with a fund, right? Like a fund was ready to jump in, but the fund had a very different strategy than Fabien and his team had, which in the end was a fundraising strategy, but as a strategy discussion of like raise less now, raise more later. And they didn't want to, so they had this whole, the thing was going sideways. Everything was going well, and then it wasn't. And you can write that down. You can like have that plan on a spreadsheet. But the problem obviously is it's psychology, right? Like how do you handle getting a curveball, and the problem is also like you normally don't discuss fundraising stories that are not like exponentially going insanely well.
Okay, so that was his worst moment. What about when you were raising and building out your company? What was that worst moment, and how did you handle that?
My first moment was probably during COVID. Again, it goes back to you build up, like you have a hypothesis, something that you think should exist. You build something, you sell it, you prove your hypothesis, and then you continue and you try to make it big. The issue that we ran into was just at the beginning of COVID, or like shortly before COVID. We thought we had figured out this like magical like product market fit. We raised money on a product and an approach that we had. We had a big funding round. We thought we knew who our customer were, and they were retail, like big retail chains. And then COVID happened, and our whole promise didn't work anymore because retail didn't work anymore in the fashion that we were used to, right? So we got ghosted, and all the promises and everything that we also set up and we believed in didn't happen, right? So we couldn't like fulfill the promise of our like given funding round, and we needed to come up with a new strategy.
That's not easy at all. So one step back, you were talking about Fabien taking 14 months to raise. You mentioned how he had some difficult conversations with some of the potential investors. As things were moving along and not necessarily going perfectly, did they change their story? Did they pivot? How did they respond?
Well, so pivot is a very overused word. Like, it might mean change in product, it might mean change in strategy, it might also mean a change in story. And what they did is the change in story, the change in narrative. So it's less like focused on the product itself. They were still mining with plants, and like overarching story, mining with plants is like a very oversimplified explanation of what they do, obviously. But when they got feedback, you need to work with that feedback. And unfortunately, investors are not the most forward people with feedback. Sometimes they also just ghost you and say it's not the right time, and they mean, I don't understand your story. So it's more about getting the right signals and trying to pick up these signals and then building your narrative around that.
Uh, Gotcha. So when you were raising, did you make changes like this?
And needing to feel safe that it's the right investment is a feeling. And this feeling can be supported with proof points, right? And the question again is like, what is good proof points? And this brings us back to like this Q&A thing. If you work on the questions that you're getting again and again, you get better and better at answering these questions. And for that, you need to, record the questions and find a good way to like also work on the answers. Fabien is, I think, like a very extreme but a very good example on that. And they, in the end, had a Q&A doc that was hundreds of pages long. And they also customized that Q&A doc to specific investors. So like one investor was getting a doc that had 60 pages by itself. And that like sounds insane, but again, it goes back to like this psychology of you need to feel safe. So, you need to at least think that the founder has all the answers, or at least thought through a decent amount of them.
That's a lot of pages. I guess, at least for them, I guess it worked. So you're going through this process, you're trying to raise money. It's not easy. You're taking a pounding for months trying to pull this off. It must be really difficult trying to stay positive and to also not get in that position where you feel like you're maybe under attack. Could you maybe speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, you already mentioned it, right? Like it's about staying focused, and staying grounded and not getting down by the big curveballs, but also the small curveballs where you think, you have a specific call that you have spent weeks setting up, and then the person gets sick the day before, and then you need to move it a few weeks again. Matters that you keep focused on, making progress with the company, and it goes back to like the whole like product and selling the product. Like, what are you doing? What do you want to bring into the world? And like, how is the market, and how are like your potential customers responding to that? And you need to keep doing that while you're doing fundraising. So the whole like grounding question for me is a lot about like finding the right coping mechanisms when you're down. And I think these coping mechanisms can be vastly different. Like, I knew a founder once where his coping mechanism was going to the sauna every day. Like every day at like 10 p.m., he was going to the sauna, and he had like a sauna run for like 30 minutes, right? And he needed that to work and to function and to like think about his day.
It's funny, I'm smiling because you mentioned the sauna, and at one point, I was helping to run a very large political campaign, and myself and the other co-campaign manager, we would hit up the sauna every single night because we desperately needed to decompress, and then we realized that it was the most private place and the best place to have conversations about campaign strategy because there was nobody else there, and it got to the point where we even had a documentary crew filming things for the campaign, and then they really wanted to come with us to the sauna, which fortunately they didn't, but I can relate. Getting back to the main conversation here, talking about Fabien's raise. Now, it took, again, we mentioned this, it took 14 months. Most of this time, there weren't a lot of investors that had a lot of fear of missing out, not a lot of FOMO going on. And then later on, of course, now it ends up being totally oversubscribed. There's tons of interest. It's more interest than they could possibly handle. Now, in your piece, you say that you can't force FOMO, but you do say that there are really important steps that you can take that help to create the right conditions for causing FOMO or creating it. What exactly can people do to create those conditions?
A friend of mine who's very, very, very good at fundraising once called it catching lightning in a bottle. It's not impossible, but it's very, very unlikely that you can get it done at the right time and like, when you want it, how you want it, right? But let's make these proof points concrete. Like one is, I think, always be selling. Like that is the most proof you can build for what you're doing is if the market actually responds to it. Not investors, but like your actual customers. As we are like in deep tech climate world, that doesn't necessarily mean that need to have everything in place and sell your finished product. Pre-purchase agreements are a thing, right? Like book and claim is a thing. You can get your potential future customer also to join and help you out, right? Like credible early commitments in the form of sales is the most important thing. The second most important thing is technical progress, and technical progress needs to be clear technical milestones, right? And clear technical milestones mean it needs to be understandable. If you're talking to investors, investors won't be as technically expert at your thing as you are. So you need to also have milestones that they understand or that you can make them understand and you can explain to them, right? And that goes for everyone. That goes for your team, right? And your team is probably number three, right? You need to have really good strategic hires. In the end, you're promising something. You're going to build, a life-changing or industry-changing company, and for that, you cannot do it alone. So you need to have like the right people in place. And if you get really awesome people to believe in you and join your team, that is always like a very good step. And then it's about building relationship, right? So the logic here is, dots turn into a line. You cannot imagine that you can come in and say, okay, this is my finished company, this is my finished product. Now, please give me money. This is not Shark Tank out here. The most of the relationships take time to form, right? And time can be between weeks, but more realistically, months to years. So you can actually show, okay, like I want to build this. This is the progress that I'm making, and then you update people. And like through this, you build trust. And same then goes with the psychology. Like, you believe that you're going to build something, so show conviction. Show conviction that the learnings that you're making and the thing that you're building actually is helping you in the direction that you want to go in.
It's an interesting listen. It's funny. We come right back to psychology again. It's a real theme that keeps coming back again and again in your piece. So something we touched on a little bit earlier, the team management challenge. So you're a founder, you're raising money, you need to prioritize fundraising, you need to prioritize your investors, and at the same time, you need to be able to motivate your team to continue executing as the company develops. Maybe you could talk a little bit more to this.
Yeah. So unfortunately, most employees have no idea what raising is like. You probably didn't hire a team that is ex-founders that went through multiple fundraising rounds, right? So you need to guide them, right? And you need to show and explain to them what you're doing. But there's a balancing act there. Like you need to balance transparency, right? Like, how is the fundraising process going? Also with protection, because like your team members are not there to raise. Your team members are there to actually build products, sell, do operations, do marketing, whatever. And for that, you need to keep them motivated and you need to keep them like on target. And the proof, again, is not in the pitch decks. The proof is in what your team is producing.
So you say that there's a list of factors when raising that don't actually really matter, that sometimes people think do, but maybe don't matter as much. And then you say there are others that are absolutely critical. Maybe we could start out with the list of factors here that you think don't actually matter so much.
So as always, this is like one perspective. But what doesn't matter is geography of investors. Like Genomines was a very good example of, it's a French company, with nice French accented founders that are doing, their experiments globally, and they raised from American investors. Geography doesn't necessarily matter. The perfect pitch deck also doesn't matter. I know a lot of founders who are working on their pitch deck for half a year before they go out and they show it to people. Like you need feedback, and like for that you cannot wait for perfection. Build your pitch deck, go out and test it out, and then improve it. And then you have industry specific investors, right? And this is like a very like Genomines insight again. You can raise from generalist investors just as well. But for that, you need to do more explanation. You need to like change your story. You need to be like more to the point there. And like what matters then is like the whole process question. Like this is something that I think a lot of people underestimate. You get an email in your inbox, and you take 3 days to respond is wrong. Like the speed of response and the quality of your response, going back to like the Q&A question, is really, really important, because it shows not only commitment, but it also shows how well your process and your team is run, and like how much you also value the whole thing. And then, warm intros also matter. Fabien had this example of like the best intros are portfolio company intros to their investors. So if an investor already invested in somebody, the thing that really that they really matter that they really value is getting an intro from these founders to other founders. Founders talk to founders, and they also trust founders. And then it's also the team quality, right? Like that matters a lot, because you're obviously not only judged by yourself as the founder of the company, not only your product is being judged, but also your whole team in the end is being judged, or at least your leadership team. And then, going back to what I said, the whole like long-term relationship building. Yes, you can be lucky and have one good call with an investor, and it's your first call, and you did cold outreach and everything works out. But like most of the investors who will invest in you, they expect this like long-term relationship building. And it's also a better version of their research.
That's helpful. I think for people who are out there raising, I think maybe they'll help give them some clarity, and they can break down sort of what to really emphasize and maybe where to pull back a little bit. So you had the conversation with Fabien, but afterwards, and you're putting together your piece, you broke down a very long to-do list of what you would do if you were raising money today. We can't go through all of the details, but maybe you could give people just a couple of examples of the kinds of things that you would recommend.
Alrighty, I'll give three to keep it simple, and I will like differentiate them. What do you do before a raise? What do you do in the middle of a raise? And like at like the end of the raise. Before a raise, build relationship as soon as possible, because the more relationships you have at the moment where you actually start your fundraise, the easier the fundraise gets. Mid raise is the point where you need to reach certain milestones. A lot of founders unfortunately get disconnected. They only focus on the fundraising process. Everything else falls apart. Like as long as they get the money in the bank, everything will work out again. And that's not true. Like selling and milestones is your real pitch. The thing that makes your companies is building your company, not raising your money. So don't forget that while you're in the middle of the process. And at the end of the process, I think it goes back to the psychology question again of like, okay, like who do you want to be with, for the long term, right? Like trust your gut. You want this, to be over the whole fundraising process, but your investors unfortunately also stick around, right? So this is in a lot of ways like it's a marriage, and you need to think about who do you want to be married to.
I think that's helpful. I think it gives people a flavor. Now, I want to read something that you wrote at the end of the article. And you said, fundraising is not a rational process. It's a mental endurance test dressed up as a business transaction. You can have the best company, the best team, the best traction, and the best pitch deck, and still spend 24 or still spend 14 months getting rejected. Not because you're doing it wrong, but because you're asking people to believe in a future that doesn't exist yet and give you millions of dollars to build it. That requires trust, and trust takes time. Now, you put together a list, ideas of what you think separates founders who close from founders who don't close. And this was one of the things I thought was maybe one of the most interesting parts of the article. You specifically say that they don't teach these ideas at business school, and that they don't include them in the Y Combinator Playbook. And so I'm sure people here who are listening are sitting there saying, I can't learn this at business school. I can't get it from Y Combinator. This is the critical stuff of who closes versus who doesn't. Now, what's in this list?
Number one, it goes back to the psychology question. You will hear a lot of no's. So you need to maintain conviction when everyone says no and nobody believes in you, right? Like you need to keep going. You need to keep focused on what you want to achieve. You need to be clear around that. You need to also keep executing. That's number two. We had that a few times in our conversation right now. Execution is the thing that matters. And fundraising will become a full-time job. So now you have two full-time jobs. You need to like execute on building your company, and you need to execute on fundraising. But never forget about the execution part. Number three is also focus on your psychology. Managing your own psychology is important, and you also need to manage the psychology of your team and the psychology of your investors. So be sure that your psychology and your focus and your conviction is there, and it doesn't poison your pitch. Because if you're like halfway checked out, people can feel that, both your team and the investors. And then the other thing, again, building relationship. And building relationship takes time. Building relationship takes months. It can take years, not weeks, not days. So the important part is build relationships and build them from a good place. And then, shit will happen, right? Like you will get the no, you will get the rejection, you might get the yes, but might get the thing that Fabien get of like, hey, we really want to invest, but I think we should change your strategy. And you need to stay curious and you stay neutral and maybe go back to like number one, you still maintain your conviction. So you will get rejected, you will get yes butted, but like you need to be clear on like what is your plan, and you need to be open around like how do you change your plan. And then the last thing is also I think important for psychology, but also like important for like the general like mindset here is like know when to push, like know when you can go and ask more of investors, when you can like stay your path, and when doesn't it work out anymore? Like, yes, we all have our dream investors, and even if our dream investors don't ghost us, and you have a conversation with them, and they say no yet, not ready. Like, how many follow ups do you do? And I think like the most important is going back again to the conviction question. It's a refusal to quit when everyone else would, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you should do 10 years of the same thing over and over again. But understanding that fundraising process takes time. Like Fabien's fundraise took 14 months. It's just something that you need to like mentally accept.
It sounds kind of crazy, and yet I think that sounds just about right. I think that's probably what it is. That's what drives people and pushes them through where they actually get to that promised land. So this is a fascinating conversation. We've only scratched the surface. There's a ton more in the article you wrote. I really hope that every founder and people, particularly those who are raising now, I hope everyone gets a chance to hear this and learn from your experience, from Fabien's experience, everything you learned, and particularly all the pain you went through. Maybe try and help them to avoid some of that pain. Of course, we'll put the link for this article below. You can always go to Substack. You can always go to the Climate Drift website and check things out. Skander, you're a very productive guy. You're just like pumping out like viral article after fascinating piece, one after another. I never know what you're going to come out with next. I'm sure there's another one brewing right now. But as always, I'm always looking forward to our next conversation.
I'm also looking forward to our next conversation. And yes, I've got a few articles in draft.
Aha, I knew it. I knew there was more coming. There always is. So if you liked what you heard, please do share this episode with your friends, especially those who are founders or people thinking about raising money. Do sign up for the Climate Drift newsletter, subscribe to the channel, like the show, comment on the episode, all that good stuff. We always need that to happen. And we will be back again soon with another episode shortly. Thanks so much.
Looking forward to it.
See you later.